Oh hey, welcome back. Have you ever wondered, what's the deal with offset bridges? Why are offset guitar players so obsessed with them? And why has there been such an explosion of aftermarket offset bridges in the last 12 or 18 months? And what difference or benefit could there actually be in swapping out your offset bridge anyway? And with so many different offset bridges available on the market now, how do we even begin to distinguish between them meaningfully or to put them into meaningful boxes or categories? Well, this is a primer to a mega comprehensive video that I'm going to be making in due course once I have reviewed and demoed every single offset bridge on the market. Today, we're just covering the basics and the essentials. So, buckle up as we dive headfirst down the rabbit hole that is offset bridges. Before we get into it, please satiate the ravenous algorithm by liking this video, sharing your thoughts with me in the comments below, subscribing to the channel for bi-weekly offset guitar content, and sharing this video with someone who you think would find it interesting. Your positive engagement with this video really does determine how many people it will reach and the potential of the channel to really grow and flourish. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for all of your support. Alright then, so why offset bridges? Why are there so many? Why do I have so many? And why do offset guitar players find them so desirable and fun and cool? Well, firstly, there are very few parts on an offset guitar that can so profoundly impact the sound, feel, and performance of the instrument. And there are also very few parts that offer such opportunities for creativity and problem solving. The bridge on any guitar is one of the essential interfaces between the player and the instrument and between the instrument and the string. It fundamentally influences how your strings resonate, which shapes the sound of your instrument. But also, it's perhaps the most consistent point of contact between the player and the instrument. Now, sure, you're always going to be touching somewhere on the neck or the fretboard at any given time. However, your hand is going to be constantly moving across those surfaces, and it's rarely going to rest in the same position for an extended period of time. However, with the bridge, it's so often the place that the picking hand is anchored to, or so often returns to, whether picking or strumming. And unlike the neck, the player will be in contact with the majority, if not the whole of the bridge at any given time. Therefore, any changes to the offset bridge design can not only be heard and observed, but tangibly felt. More than just a practical consideration, upgrading your offset guitar bridge can completely transform your relationship with the instrument. And unlike most guitars, where if you upgrade the bridge, you're really just going to get a higher quality version of exactly the same bridge, because after all, a tunematic bridge at the end of the day is just a tunematic bridge. There is so much room for creativity, and there are so many variables with the offset bridge design. And this is what makes the offset bridge so cool. Now, of course, it can't be overlooked that part of the reason for the proliferation of aftermarket offset bridges is due to the shortcomings of the original design. While Leo Fender was a genius, and in many ways the original Jazzmaster bridge design is excellent, there's no denying that there are some practical issues with the traditional barrel saddle offset bridge. If you're new to the world of offset bridges, one of the biggest issues with them is that they have lots of little components that aren't necessarily machined with the finest tolerances. For example, by way of comparison, on a Tunematic bridge, you have 6 saddles securely held in a machined slot by a dedicated, non-removable screw. The bridge base is then placed on 2 thumb wheels, which can be adjusted using a screwdriver, or if the strings are completely slackened, they can be adjusted by hand in order to adjust the bridge height. The radius of a Tunematic bridge is fixed, so the saddles simply move up and down their dedicated retaining screw. On a traditional Gibson design, you will then have a very steep string angle, giving a huge amount of downforce applied by the strings onto the bridge, which holds everything securely in place and means there is nothing loose or left to rattle or buzz around. However, on a traditional Jazzmaster bridge, you have 6 small saddles sitting loosely on the bridge plate, held in place with a spring and a small screw that is threaded through the bridge base. The radius is not fixed, so you then have 12 tiny grub screws, 2 in each saddle, to adjust the radius. The height of the bridge is then adjusted by 2 long grub screws with pointed feet that are threaded through the bridge legs and are adjusted with an Allen key. Because on an offset guitar the bridge is so much further away from the tailpiece of the instrument, there is significantly less downforce or string tension applied to the bridge because the break angle is so much more shallow. This means that the strings are not doing the same job of securely holding everything in place, which means in turn there is a lot more potential for rattle and buzz and for things to move out of position. The result of all of this is we get the wonderful rocking bridge mechanic that offset guitars are so well known for, but we also have 14 tiny grub screws, 6 springs, and saddles that aren't held very firmly in place. And this gives rise to the main problems plaguing the traditional offset bridge. Firstly, with so many small parts, offset bridges are so prone to producing unwanted buzzes and rattles. It's so frustrating to be playing your guitar and constantly greeted by the various annoying unwanted noises of poorly secured components. Secondly, the imperfect fit of the threaded grub screws of the bridge legs commonly results in the bridge lowering or falling down while you're playing. This means that any setup work completely goes out the window once you start playing, and it can render the guitar completely unplayable. Not what you want when you're on stage. Thirdly, with so many little grub screws sticking up out of the saddles, the traditional barrel bridge isn't necessarily the most comfortable to use. And lastly, the relative lack of string tension on the bridge can result in the strings falling off or popping out of the saddle grooves under heavy or intense playing. And all of these factors together can result in a less than ideal playing experience, as you might imagine. And while a thorough application of Loctite and a decent setup can remedy a lot of these issues, it does give quite a lot of opportunity to improve on the original design. Now, I think the popularity of modern aftermarket offset bridges can at least in part be attributed to the fact that the traditional remedies to these issues have left quite a lot to be desired. If you look closely at the offset guitars used by your favourite grunge, noise rock or shoegaze bands from the 90s, you will probably be able to observe one of the 3 following remedies that those artists employed. The first one is the use of the tunematic bridge, and you can see this one really commonly, for example on the guitars of Jazzmaster, Thurston Moore and Kurt Cobain. And while, as we discussed earlier, the tunematic bridge is much less prone to the buzz and rattle and other issues produced by an offset bridge, it really doesn't work all that well on an offset guitar. Firstly, you get a significant mismatch in the radius of the bridge compared with the radius of the fretboard. In the 90s, those artists would have been using guitars with a 7.25 inch radius fretboard, so a nice curvy fretboard. Whereas the radius of a tunematic bridge is fixed at 12 inches, which is significantly flatter than the radius of the fretboards on those guitars. And so in essence, you had a fretboard that was this shape and strings that were set at an arc at this shape, which really isn't an ideal situation because the B and E strings and the E and A strings are going to be significantly higher up off the fretboard than those middle D and G strings. Secondly, the tunematic bridge is a very tall bridge that's designed to be used with guitars with a significant amount of pitchback on the neck. And this means that modifications would be needed to introduce significantly more pitchback into the guitar's neck than they otherwise would have had. Not only that, but the installation of a tunematic bridge on an offset guitar is a destructible and irreversible one. It means fundamentally increasing the size of the bridge thimble holes from 9 or 9.5mm to 11 or 12mm. And once you've taken that wood out, you can't put it back. The next issue with this remedy is that installing a tunematic bridge on an offset guitar doesn't necessarily stop the issues of the strings popping out the saddles. Tunematic bridges have a very shallow string groove, and even though the bridge is much taller, and on a Gibson style guitar you don't have issues of strings popping out the saddles, given the distance between the tailpiece and the bridge, there is still not enough downforce on a tunematic bridge to stop the string popping out the saddle, particularly with its shallow groove, and so it's not uncommon to see offset guitars with tunematic bridges where the saddle popping completely remains an issue. And the last issue with this remedy is that tunematic bridges really aren't designed to be used with a vibrato. They have quite sharp edges on the saddles. They're designed for the string to just sit there in a stationary manner. And so used with an offset vibrato, these can give rise to significant tuning stability issues, which we really don't want to have on our offset guitars. The next and far more sensible remedy you might have seen is players swapping out their traditional barrel saddle bridge for a Mustang bridge, and in a lot of ways this is a much better choice to make. However, we do still have some issues with this remedy. The first one is that the Mustang bridge has a much wider string spacing than a traditional offset bridge. With the barrel saddle bridge, you have numerous serrations on each saddle that means you can perfectly choose the string spacing that you want for your particular guitar or playing style. Whereas on the Mustang bridge, it has a fixed 55mm string spacing. And this means that your outer strings will be very close to the edges of the fretboard, and it's very easy to knock them off and get that weird noise that you get when you knock your strings off the edge of the fretboard. Additionally, Mustang bridges use the exact same bridge legs and grub screws that the traditional barrel saddle bridge used, and there's nothing to guarantee that the Mustang bridge won't slowly fall down and collapse over time in exactly the same way that the traditional barrel bridge does. And also, that means that those legs can still produce unwanted rattling or buzzing noises as well. And the third traditional remedy you might have seen from your favourite artists of the 80s and 90s is the use of tape to stop the bridge from rocking and to try and hold the components in place. And unfortunately, again, if we stop the bridge from rocking, that is arguably going to give rise to tuning stability issues because those bridges are designed to rock in order to retain tuning stability. And it also isn't going to address the fact that the strings are still going to be able to pop out of the saddle groove if you're playing with a heavy or aggressive playing style. But then salvation came in the early 2000s with the introduction of the Stay-Trem bridge and the Mastery bridge. And for a very long time, that's all there was. So why has there been such an explosion of aftermarket bridges now? Well, apart from the obvious issues of the Mastery being incredibly expensive, especially outside the USA, and the Stay-Trem having a very long wait if you want to be able to get one, I think there are other issues that have particularly produced this boom in offset bridges that we're currently seeing. Firstly, I think offset guitars are far more varied than any other type of guitar. And before you think I'm talking nonsense, just think about it for a second. Between the Squier, Fender Mexico, Fender Japan and Fender USA models of offset guitars, you can find a Jaguar or Mustang with a 7 1/4 inch radius, a 9.5 inch radius, a 12 inch radius or even a compound radius. And you also have a lot of different scale lengths within the offset family, ranging from 24 inches with the Mustang and Jaguar all the way through to the 30 inch scale length of the Bass 6, which still uses the same bridge design. There is significantly more variance here than you would find either between the fretboard radius or the scale length with a Gibson style guitar or a Strat or a Tele. And in addition to this, there's now lots of non-Fender offset style guitars using an offset style bridge. This leads into the wider conversation, secondly, about the boom in popularity of offset guitars in the last few years. Offset guitars are so cool and trendy now, at least as an aesthetic, that you're seeing genty, chuggy metal guys putting their metal guitars in an offset shape because the offset guitar shape is currently so cool and desirable and on trend. And so thirdly, with so much more demand and interest in offset guitars now, I think cynically, it makes manufacturing offset hardware so much more profitable or viable than it might have been before. So I have to say massive props to John at Stay-Trem and Mastery for producing offset hardware for the love of offset guitars, even when the market was so much smaller and when it perhaps wasn't quite so profitable. And therefore, as a result of this higher demand for offset hardware, a manufacturer is more likely to get a decent return or even a profit or a decent income from making an offset bridge than they would have done 15 or 20 years ago. And fourthly, with this increase in demand, the gaps in the market became even more obvious than they might have been before. You had the very cheap and traditional looking Stay-Trem, and you had the incredibly expensive, very modern looking Mastery, and those bridges were about $200 apart in price. And so there was so much scope there for other manufacturers to then come in offering different takes on the offset bridge and at different price points as well. And that's really what we've started to see in the last 12 or 18 months. And fifthly, I think because offset guitars have had more of an underground following than the more mainstream popularity of the Les Paul, Strat, Tele, SG, etc., I think there is much less of a movement amongst offset guitar players to preserve a really traditional aesthetic. And I think offset guitarists are more open to a more radical or a more artistic interpretation of the hardware on their guitars than a Les Paul player or a Strat player might be. And lastly, all of these offset bridges are offering their own particular take on how to solve the issues with the traditional offset bridge, and they're all offering their own feel and functions and look and tone and offering you something different and unique, each one for your offset guitar. So with all of these different bridges available now and all the different designs and takes on the offset bridge, how can we go about differentiating them so we can meaningfully understand the differences between all of these different designs, and how can we split them up into categories to aid our understanding and comparison of all the different options that are out there now? Well, the first way we might go about it, and the way that I'm first inclined to try and do this, is by price. And we can split these up into 4 categories. Bridges under £100, bridges £100 to £149, bridges £150 to £199, and then bridges that are £200 plus. Now, the obvious problem with this way of categorizing bridges is the fact that most of these bridges are made by small, boutique, independent craftsmen spread all over the world. This means that part of the cost of each of these bridges is going to be the cost of shipping it to your location from wherever that particular artisan is based. And this is inevitably going to include, in some instances, international shipping and taxes. We also have the problem of conversion rate to contend with then as well. And so, for example, in the UK, the mastery costs about $100 more than it costs in the US. And part of that will come down to the exchange rate on any given day, but also it comes down to the international shipping and the duties and taxes that are levied upon it upon its entrance to the UK as well. And so while price can be a meaningful metric when discussing the differences between offset bridges and putting bridges in different categories, it's clearly a flawed metric that isn't going to work universally. So what are the alternatives? I propose that a better metric to use to distinguish between the different types of offset bridge we have and to put them into meaningful groups is to distinguish them by their features. Now, I would say we should have 4 overarching categories here. The first one would be largely Mustang inspired 6-saddle designs. The second, largely Telly inspired 3-saddle designs. Fourthly, the super trendy Cool Kid 2-saddle designs. And lastly, the pretty wacky and wild 1-saddle designs. And then within each of those 4 categories, we can then distinguish between whether the bridge is locking or not, and whether the bridge is rocking or not. This then gives us 4 overarching categories, and within those we have 4 subcategories. And then within those overarching categories, or within those subcategories, we can then distinguish or order them by price if we wanted to. Now, while I appreciate this sounds like a lot of different categories, I think this is a really good way of doing it, because if, for example, you're really interested in the Tuffset bridge, you can then think, okay, the Tuffset is a 6-saddle design that is both locking and rocking. What are the other bridges with those same features that I might also be interested in? Or, for example, the Mastery is a 2-saddle design that is locking but non-rocking. And then we could consider all the other bridges that meet those same criteria. Or if we wanted a 2-saddle design that is locking and rocking, we could then zoom out into that wider overarching category to see if there would be any bridges that would meet that criteria. All of this is a precursor to a really exciting project that I'm currently working on. I'm currently building a website that is going to be the world's first comprehensive offset bridge database, where a library of all my YouTube videos on offset bridges will be present, as well as more thoughtful or cerebral written reviews for every single bridge, as well as a comprehensive comparison of every single offset bridge, listing every single spec of each bridge, as well as being able to view bridges in order of price, both euros, pounds and dollars for the unit price, as well as the total price of each of those bridges shipped to the US, the UK or Central Europe, again listed in pounds, dollars and euros. As well as this, players will be able to view bridges by category and subcategory as I've just outlined, as well as having access to a really fun, interactive offset bridge finding tool that I'm in the process of making as well. It turns out websites take a lot more time to make and are much more expensive to make and maintain than I realized. So if you'd be interested in supporting me with this, I'm going to include a link below where you can buy me a coffee or contribute a small amount if you'd be interested in supporting me on this venture and speeding up the process to create this really fun, really cool, interactive, online offset bridge database. So there you go. All of this combined is the reason why I and so many other offset guitar players are so fascinated and obsessed with offset bridges, and it's why I'm on a mission to test and demo and review every single offset bridge on the market. On most guitars, the bridge is a purely practical piece of hardware, whereas on an offset guitar, the bridge is a work of art that transforms the feel, the look, the sound and the performance of the instrument in a way that it simply doesn't on other guitars. That is why offset bridges are so cool and so special, and you'll see us talking about them so much and in so much detail. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that was fun and interesting and informative. I hope you're looking forward to the offset bridge database. I'm working on it as fast as I can, and I think it's going to be a really fun, a really useful tool for offset guitar players and for the offset guitar community. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments, as usual, and if you have any questions about anything I've said in this video, I'll be happy to discuss that with you in as much detail as you'd like. Cool, alright then, well until next time, take it easy, look after yourselves, and we'll see each other again soon.